Hello boys and girls. Today our lesson is going to be on fractions and decimals. So the first thing that we're going to review is our decimal place values. If I am reading this word, or this number actually, it says 1 and, the only time we say and in numbers is decimals, 1 and 85 hundredths. So when you hear 85 hundredths, does something else come to your mind? There's a way to write this as a fraction. Our whole number stays the same, and how would we write 85 hundredths? Well, you could write it 85 hundredths. This says 1 and 85 hundredths, and this says 1 and 85 hundredths. Same if I have, what is this? This is 8 tenths or 8 hundredths. 8 tenths. We know it's tenths even though it's a single digit because it's a decimal. There's no such thing as once. It doesn't even sound like a real word. So when you see this and you think, oh, it can't be tenths because it's only one digit, ask yourself, can I have once? No, this is our tenths. And how do we write 8 tenths? 8 tenths. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to go through a couple of examples. How would we say this? 1 and 79 hundredths. We can also write that as a decimal. 1 and 79 hundredths. And this is 79 hundredths because what are our decimal place values? Tenths, hundredths, no ones. What if I had 8 hundredths written as a fraction? How would I write that as a decimal? Does this look right? Is that 8 hundredths? No, that's 8 tenths. So what can I do to make it 8 hundredths? I have to add a 0. Now I have my eighths in the hundredths. Now let's go the other way. I'm going to give the decimal and then we'll change it into a fraction. First thing you should do is read it. 3 and 7 hundredths, not tenths. That's our hundredths. If this is tenths, this makes ones. Remember, no ones. So we would write it 3 and 7 hundredths. 5 and 3 tenths. 5 and 3 tenths. So now we see how we can go between fractions and decimals. There's one more thing I want to cover relating fractions and decimals. Those were all really easy because they were tenths and hundredths. But what happens if you have a crazy one that's not in tenths or hundredths? For example, if we have 3/4, we can't just write that as a decimal because we know decimals are in tenths and hundredths. But this is in fourths. Well, it goes back to that same concept when we know that another way to say this is 3 divided by 4. Who is my king? The 3. Who is my peasant? My 4. Now that looks like a really strange division problem, but do you remember that magical power I gave you? You're allowed to add zeros. So we put a decimal, and we change that. It's that magical power I gave you at the beginning of the year. You're allowed to add a decimal and as many zeros as you need. So then we just use our knowledge of decimal division to find our answer. I'm making the decimal really big so that you can make sure we see it. 4 goes into 3, 0 times. 4 goes into 30, 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28. 30 minus 28 is 2. Can we have a remainder with our decimals? Oh, because decimals are already parts. What can you do? What's your magical power? Add a 0. 4 goes into 20 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. 20 minus 20 is 0. Therefore, your decimal that matches the fraction of 3/4 is 75 hundredths. Let's try just a few more. What if you have 2/5? You can't just say that's 0.25 or 2.5 or 25 hundredths or 2 and 5 hundredths. That won't work. This isn't in tenths. It isn't in hundredths. We can only change a fraction straight to a decimal when it's in tenths or hundredths. If it's not in tenths or in hundredths, we have to use what we know about division. Who goes in the castle? The king. Who goes on the outside? The peasant. We use our magical power to add a decimal and a 0. 5 goes into 2 0 times. Add your decimal, goes straight up. 5 goes into 20 4 times. 5 times 4, 20. 20 minus 20, 0. So 2/5 written as a decimal is 4/10. Now you can watch this video as many times as you need to until you understand how to change a fraction to a decimal.